Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Index podcast. My name is Matt Phelan, and I am here with Anne Burt. How are you doing, Anne?
I'm doing really well this morning. How about you, Matt?
I'm good. I'm good. The sun is out in North London. How do we start? We always start by getting to know you a little bit. So it would be good for you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Thanks a lot. Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Anne Burt, and I head up employee engagement at DEFRA, which is the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Bit of a mouthful. So we have the government department that looks after all those things that we need to live, basically. The land, the water, the air we breathe, the food we eat, all of those sorts of things. Look after that for about 35,000 people across 34 organisations. Really interesting, amazing work that our people do.
And because obviously DEFRA are sometimes in the news, sometimes they're not. There's obviously a lot going on in the budget with farmers and stuff at the moment. When stuff's in the news, does it impact how employees feel, or are you separated from that? That's
Um,
just interesting.
it's been an issue that I've been close to probably like my whole 2 decades in the public sector. I think we are citizens as well, being
Yeah,
public servants. We're working on important things, but we also are members of society. So we pay, I think probably, I can't speak for everybody or 500,000 civil servants, but we do care about these things and we do hear about these stories and trying to make sure that individually everyone's working to do their best and that when they're with their family, with their friends, they can talk about what they're doing individually. And I think, and in any organization, seeing it in the media can be
yeah,
quite tough because what you do individually might not always directly translate to what the media are portraying.
yeah. And I guess people come with preconceptions of what you're doing. It comes with every job, doesn't it? If you're a lawyer, an accountant, a fisher person, a farmer, anything, there's a preconception of what you do versus the reality, isn't there?
Exactly. And actually, that's one of the things I love is finding stories about what our brilliant people do. So there's a, probably a very out of date idea of what a civil servant might do, which is you might have a briefcase and a bowler hat and be strolling down Whitehall. Very few people do that. They haven't for a long time. Actually, most civil servants are doing things like working in job centres, in prisons, at the borders. I've worked a lot in operational parts of government, so helping people deliver driving tests, for example, that really important moment in your life when you take your driving test, that's actually a civil servant assessing you. It's such a privilege to work with people like that because they are doing things that matter to this country day in, day out, but they don't fit people's stereotype probably of what a civil servant would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get into your career a little bit more, can you tell us what makes you happy? What makes Anne Burt happy?
What makes me happy? I think for me, it's the ability to appreciate things that make me feel alive. So that I like to focus on the little things. For example, last night, Arsenal ladies overcame a really insurmountable obstacle and managed to beat Real Madrid in the second leg. They were down 2-0 in the first after the first leg. They managed to come back, get 3 goals last night. So they're through. That's the kind of thing that you go, that's a great thing to watch and enjoy. My parents were there, had a brilliant night, said it was fantastic. This morning, I've managed to have an amazing coffee because we have a bog standard, I'd say, staff canteen, does the usual sandwiches, jacket potatoes, that kind of stuff. We've got a brilliant barista here who draws lovely pictures. She's nailed the coffee art. So I get a love heart on my coffee. I get a smiley face. That,
Yeah,
weirdly enough, makes me so happy, those kind of things, because it's like that connection that you get with other people and food. Coffee
yeah.
and cake and a good chat with a barista this morning was definitely made me feel happy.
But interestingly, something that makes you happy makes me unhappy, which is
I
interesting.
know.
As a Tottenham women's fan,
Apologies.
I think I've been to Tottenham Arsenal women 10 times, and I don't think I've ever seen Tottenham even get, I think maybe one draw. That's not good. It's not good. But let's move on.
It's the hope that kills you, Matt, isn't it? That's what they say.
It really is. It really is. And there's some good
We could
paper.
do a whole we could do a whole episode about the perverse happiness you get out of following a football team, I imagine.
Yeah, I've actually written an article on it, but I haven't published it because I just worry that everyone's going to hate me for what it says. But it is based on our research and data. It's about the fact that the winning bit actually isn't why you support football teams; it's the community piece, and we see that in our data as well. And you wouldn't be a Tottenham fan, you wouldn't be a Tottenham fan. You
Right,
wouldn't be
right.
a Bury fan. You wouldn't be a Colchester fan. That's not what football's about, even though that's what we all want. Um,
Exactly.
but that is a story for that
It
day.
definitely is the connection. It's the meeting the same people if you're a season ticket holder, going every week,
Yeah,
being in that crowd. feeling like you're the 12th player
Yeah.
on the pitch, helping the team,
Yeah.
and learning to roll with the tough times when they come as well.
That's true.
Supporting each other. I think there's a lot to be said for that, about the sort of the learning that life doesn't always treat you fairly and that things won't go your way.
I do think that is a modern parenting conundrum. I coach children. Coach a girls team, and one thing that I do know, one thing that being about a Spurs fan that teaches you very well is how to lose and how to deal with losing. And I definitely think that when parents or guardians play with their children, they don't always let them lose. I think they let them win a lot. And as a coach, when kids come to you, they're not used to losing, and you just do a normal drill where that you think is normal, and then they lose, and then it's meltdown time. Yeah, there's a lot we can take from football, but we're going to move on from football, and I'm going to ask you, Anne, I think you said 20 years.
Yeah.
Tell us about your career. Take us back.
So I know I'm in disbelief when I realised it was that long, in a way. Many moons ago, I studied originally as a journalist, but I absolutely loved doing that work. I loved going and talking to people, finding out their stories. I was really interested in what was happening in the world. How could I bring stories out? But unfortunately, that coincided with a time when investment in journalism was absolutely falling fast, and there was just making a career out of that was going to be very difficult. So I did the classic thing that most journalists eventually do. I just did it a lot quicker. I moved into PR and communications and did that across the public sector. I've worked in local government and the NHS for a little while, and I've been in the civil service for coming up to 2 decades now. And I've been really lucky to do a wide range of things. I felt like I've had a classic sort of zigzag career of, when I've been interested in something, there's opportunities for me to try. So I've done a lot of people related things around communications, around business change and supporting people through tough things when we change things. I'm probably sometimes people's least favorite person. I come in somewhere and I go, guess what, everyone, we're going to change something about the way you work. Stepping into those moments and supporting people through some really huge upheavals around how we work recently has been Brexit, COVID, introducing new technology to people, helping them make the most out of that to help them do things in their jobs. So I've been really interested in understanding how people work effectively, how we help support people to work at their best. And that's led me to come into work and engagement. Probably the last decade or so has been probably that intertwined with change, just helping people unpick what it is that helps them work at their best. I think I've really enjoyed doing that.
And I think that change thing is huge, isn't it? Because like my friend Gemma said this the other day, she said, most people don't really want to change, but everyone needs to change because the world and everything from work and the environment is changing around us. So we have to adapt, but most of us don't really want to. How do you get around that when you're working with him on engagement, Anand?
Definitely. I think it's looking at us as a species, as humans. We would not be here if we could not adapt to our circumstances and use our amazing brain power to figure out new ways of doing things, working on things collectively. I haven't studied it, but I've listened to a lot of podcasts and read a lot of books about how our brains work and how we work and interact with each other. I think a lot of it is based on habits, doing things the easy way. We rely on that because that's efficient, but actually unpicking those and thinking, what's got you into doing those things that way? And actually, most people, if you said to them, would you like your job to have less boring admin or less things that you feel aren't adding value? Most people will say yes. So if you can frame it that way around and you can actually bring people in and get them involved in inspiring that change rather than it always feeling top down, I think that's where I've seen it's most effective, is when rather than a senior leader having a light bulb moment and going, I want this to happen. Actually, if you're constantly sourcing ideas from your people who are the ones doing the work, how do you give them that framework and that opportunity to shape their work? That's the bit that for me is where there's a sweet spot, I think, of most people would probably feel more positive about a change, I find, if they're the ones instigating it.
I think it touches on your past and your present as well around storytelling as well, doesn't it? Because I think if you look at all the best storytellers, they put the audience at the center of the story, not the author.
Yes.
And I suppose we see that happens in this where companies go wrong. And I think I thought of it when you said the light bulb moment, where it's like the genius leader that comes up with the idea that then nobody really wants to do or isn't engaged with, just I'm putting a few of your threads together. It's about listening and then putting those threads together and telling a story that makes it feel that they want to change and that it's coming from them rather than it being forced on them. Is that fair summary of what I'm saying? Yeah.
It is. And that takes more investment. It takes more risk appetite from people as well. You have to have that space for people to do that. Companies like Google are famous for giving their engineers 1 day a week to go and investigate their own special projects, and they don't need to tell anyone what they're doing. It doesn't have to be related to their job. And then they come up with all the best ideas that way. They built their company that way. But for a lot of companies, it would be really hard to say, we're going to give everyone 20% of their time to go and do their hobbies at work. Most businesses aren't built that way. So for me, it's looking at being realistic and going, how can we start maybe a bit smaller and just look at a few things, build that business case for it? Because I think there is often a tension that leaders need to feel like they're setting the direction always and they're in charge and they're overseeing everything.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking, well, we're all grown ups. We'll manage our own lives perfectly successfully. We manage to run a household, get ourselves up and dressed and to work every morning.
Yeah.
Continuing that sense when you get to work for me is really important.
Love that. And our next question, I read it back this morning, and I think I remember it is because this question came from because it's something you said, which is why do employees act the way they do? I think this comes from you said that's what fascinates you. So I'm going to ask this question back at you. Why do employees act the way they do? That should be your book. What a great question.
Indeed. And that's what interests me. It's, again, great business leaders, like you were just saying, can have a great idea. How does that actually turn into reality? No single CEO of a company can look into every single experience of every customer of theirs every day. They can't control every moment of every employee's time. So how do they create that environment where employees get a sense of what they should be doing every day and how they decide that thought process that people go through every day? No one sets out in the morning usually going, I'm going to deliberately try and do things really badly today. But what are the processes? What are the systems in place that help people make the right choices, help nudge them towards those things? Or what feedback do they get to help them understand if they're doing a good job or not? And again, survey after survey shows there's always a massive gap between what leaders think they're doing and what employees are experiencing. Leaders think they are setting a great example, they're giving loads of feedback, they're giving really clear direction, they're setting everyone up to succeed. When you ask the employees, very often, doesn't matter what industry you're in, what kind of audiences you're looking at, generally there is a gap between how individuals feel and how managers feel they're doing in the organization. So that's the bit I love looking into, is to go, why is there that gap?
Yeah, I love that, and I mean that links what we do to the happiness index because there is always a gap, and I like to ask people how big they think the gap will be, because there's an interesting self-awareness piece there, because sometimes people think the gap is massive and it's not, and vice versa. Some people are like, oh no, we pretty much know what's going on, and then you get the data back, and the problem with the gap is, even if the gap exists, if people don't believe the gap exists, they're more resistant to hearing the data, because this is new information that's come to them, and they're like, the survey must be wrong, or the people must be lying, or this is this is something personal against me. And that, I think that gap is an important one. And I'm going to switch the questions around, because one of the things that you talk about is the curiosity.
Yes.
And I want to come to the curiosity question, because I'm just going to answer it my way round, which is, when you talked about why do employees act the way they do, I found that one of the most useful questions myself personally, to just ask someone like, why did you do that? Can you just talk me through what? And then sometimes when someone talks you through it, you're like, okay, that makes complete logical sense, even though that is not helping the outcome. It's logical that you've done that, so we need to change the logic or the system or the process in it. And I think just asking people, I'm just linking your two questions, just asking people, why did you do what you did, is really important. But the question that I have for you is, how can we foster curiosity in the workplace?
Yes. And I think for me, that does need to have a foundation of trust underneath it, because encouraging people to go and ask those tricky questions, to spend time on what might not seem hugely productive at first, going to look at what's going on and ask people those questions. Why did you do it like that? At first, you will probably uncover things that are quite uncomfortable. So you need to have that sense at first of, will people tell you that truth? Will people feel able to speak that to each other? it often happens one way, isn't it? So you'll have audit, you'll have governance, you'll have things that come top down that check whether people are doing things right. You don't really get a huge amount the other way. You might have some 360 feedback, possibly, or something like that. I know senior leaders often have metrics based around the performance of their teams. How much of that is actually based around innovation and new ideas, or spotting problems early and dealing with them, rather than being celebrated for jumping in and fixing something that's become a big problem. That's the kind of things that I think businesses, it's not in their comfort zone to measure things like that. They can very easily measure outputs. They can do net promoter scores. They can do customer satisfaction scores. They can do turnover. They can do sickness absence. They can do lots of things. It's really hard often to map out actually what is the reality in this place. How much are people encouraged to look up and out, to understand the bigger picture? For me, that's where, again, it's thinking about at a day-to-day level. So to me, it's always break it down into the tiniest steps and go every day, what are people doing in their jobs? That's why I love asking that question. Why are people doing things the way they do?
Yeah, I love it.
If everybody's interested in that question, you will get a better outcome, but it's very hard often to encourage people back to that change idea. People are very wedded to the way things are, even if they're not very great.
Yeah.
Even if things are broken and awful, people would rather have that than try something different. And all that mental effort that goes with letting go of something they're used to and moving to something new. It can be difficult to say to people, we want to change the way things are, because that's usually what the next question would be. If you say, why do you do things the way they do? That's not the way we want it to be done. We want it to do a different way.
Yeah.
That's the tricky bit, isn't it? Is that
True.
it's understanding how things have become habits in an organization, those sort of things that are unseen about how things happen. And that, for me, is definitely, starts with trust.
It really doesn't it? It's funny how these things flow into customer. This isn't in our question set, but I'd love to just touch on it a little bit with you, Anne. And I suppose in civil service, you've probably got a broader definition of what customer is. But yesterday I was sorting out my breakdown cover, and I think when I took it out 12 years ago, it's like £60 a year. And when you're busy and you don't check your renewals, it crept up to £220. And I saw it, and I was like, I'm going to do something about this. So I phoned them up and said I want to leave, and they basically. When I phoned up, first thing they said is, I just want to thank you for being a member for 12 years. And then I said, I'm on this app thing. I can see that I can get it for £60. And they came out with a classic line of, that's just for new customers. And
So it's been outlawed now.
I won't name brand, but that it was really, as a customer, it was really frustrating. But I could also tell she felt it was frustrating as well, because I was saying to her, can I give you some feedback about how this makes me feel? Because you've just said, I really appreciate it as a customer, but you won't let me access the best price that someone who's got no loyalty you will. And I was not trying to be that complaining customer. I was trying to give feedback, but I could tell she was frustrated with it as well. And there must be so many things in this, in the intersection between employee experience and customer experience, where you're doing things that just, they don't make sense if you ask that question.
And that they probably are quite powerless to do anything about. They can probably provide your feedback somewhere, and eventually it'll go and get looked at with other people's feedback. But again, the exactly that. It's like the employees are the best ambassadors for organizations, aren't they? They're the people who understand best what they're interacting with customers daily. They'll hear it. They'll pick up on those things. Are they encouraged to share that more widely, rather than just report the angry customer or the complaint? Actually asking people, we rarely ask people how they feel about the service they get, probably because, again, that opens up a whole extra layer of complexities for businesses, doesn't it? They're probably not ready for that.
No, absolutely. This is a really important question for a lot of our listeners. We talk a lot about the external research, but I'm actually asking Anne Burt now, in your experience, rather than the wider piece. But in your experience, what factors influence employee engagement scores?
Oh, I think one of the things I often say to senior leaders is it's different for every individual. You have to look at it at that completely granular level, from person to person. We are all different people. We're all influenced by different things. So unfortunately, there's no easy way. You can't bring in a universal thing and think that's going to make everyone happy. But equally, it's also about, for me, back to what we've been talking about, it is those sort of day-to-day sort of small level things, I think, that cumulatively do impact people. So you can have a great big, ambitious, bold transformation plan, but actually, if, the heating is broken in your office or people's IT means that it's really clunky to do things, I do think actually all those things combined really do matter, because it's all about, do people feel like they're getting the support they need to do their best? That's, for me, my own personal feeling about what engagement is. It's something that people have to willingly give. You can't wrench it out of people. So understanding for each person, what are the little small signs and symbols that we can give you every day to help you feel like you're supported to work at your best. And unfortunately for senior leaders, that often is. It's like changing your lifestyle. It's like saying, like people have been doing, going, I'm going to be a completely new person in January by giving up sweets or something. And it's, you have to look at every aspect of your life and think about, how do I factor in all the things that are going to come in that are going to make it really challenging? And how do I keep going with that despite all those challenging other things that might tempt me? I might be tired. I might be stressed out. I might feel unwell. Am I still going to keep going with those things because they matter? So it's that, for me, it's that decision to really look at those day-to-day things for me that make the biggest influence, I think, on whether people feel, is this true or is this just being done artificially because they think it's good for the business?
Yeah. Yeah, so true. Like when you were thinking, I was imagining, like, you think of it like food and ingredients, but everyone has some food they like, don't they? If you get everyone lasagna lunch every day, first thing, if you give everyone the same meal, not everyone's going to like it. Secondly, tastes change over, tastes and needs change over time. What I need now as a parent and what I prioritize is very different to when I wasn't a parent. So if you thought you understood me, you probably did, but it's changed. Like I couldn't work anywhere that I couldn't do the school drop in the morning, as an example. But that didn't used to be important to me. I used to be in the office every day at 8 o'clock. And I still probably work the same amount of hours per day. I just work it in a different way.
Yeah.
But if I was looking for a job and I couldn't do that, then that employee experience wouldn't create and engage me.
Yes. And I think it's interesting, a few years ago, talking less as me and more kind of things that I've really resonated with me, was I did a lot of work around smarter working and around looking at how we can really, for me, that's about outcomes based leadership. It's about trusting people to deliver their outcomes and let them shape the way they want to do it best, rather than it being about where they do the work, which has dominated a lot of the discussion since, hasn't it? But I was doing some work with a company that measures employee experience in the workplace, and the founder was saying businesses spend so much time and effort understanding for their shops, for example, how to optimize them. They understand every square foot of the shop, what is bringing them in the best revenue, how should they arrange everything in the shop to really optimize that experience and understand that. But we don't apply any of that in our own organizations usually. We don't have that laser-like lens of going, how much is it costing me per square foot of my workplace? And how am I optimizing that to make sure people are having the best experience? How do we measure any of that? That really stuck with me, because I thought, actually, it's for each person, it won't be the same.
Yeah.
But overall, you can still look at, like you would if you were in retail, and look at it as a sort of bottom line thing to think, how well am I setting the business up to deliver a sustainable business that people want to keep coming back to and keep using and spending their money? You think the same way within your own organization about your people, and thinking, are these people set up to work at their best, to really deliver what they're truly capable of?
Yeah.
I think a lot of businesses would struggle to answer that question.
Yeah. I think you can do that across every factor in the business if you apply that science and that logic. What's the cost of bullying?
Yeah.
In the culture? What is the cost of the toxic manager that is the highest performing salesperson, but 15 people have left the business, 15 other salespeople have left the business because of that person? What's the cost of every meetings one we did a podcast on? Some people actually have that now as a readout, because you can easily pull that out through an automation. How many meetings this organization had across a week? Like, you'd be surprised. So yeah, I love that thought of, they say retail is detail, don't they? And that's what the great retailers do in that experience. But I'm sure we can come up with something that rhymes, that's do with the employee experience as well. That's I'll leave us.
And I do think that's it. Businesses often have some of those tools at their disposal. They just haven't used it to look at their employee experience often.
Absolutely.
but they probably are a little bit fearful because they probably won't like what they find,
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah, that is definitely sometimes the case. But this is a good segue to the next question around firefighting, because I would say if something in a really toxic employee experience is like a fire going on in your building and just ignoring it, like eventually it's going to burn the whole place down. And that could be as big as like ethics issues in Enron through to something tinier but around disrespect of customers, which means your customers don't come back, which has a huge impact that destroys a business. But let's say we've put those fires out. How do we shift from reactive firefighting to proactive problem solving? I think everyone listening is thinking, I don't know how to do this. How do we do it, Anne?
Yes. And it is something people who know me will know I spend a lot of my time talking about this topic. I'm very passionate about it because I do feel like in a lot of businesses, we glorify the heroes who fly in with a magic cape to solve a problem, who fix things when there's a crisis. And obviously, there are things that happen that are completely unforeseeable crises that we can't plan for. But actually, for me, there are often early warning signs of things that are likely to be turning into problems. Probably it's since coming to join DEFRA, and the people are doing a lot of work looking at the future of the country, the resilience we have to feed ourselves, to look at all those things we need. We have a lot of people focused on that. How can we bring that kind of lens to how we look at things? Because actually, we don't really reward and recognize kind of people who just who really help iron out problems early and stop problems happening. We can't necessarily say, well done you for keeping the team going. That's not often recognised. Whereas if there's a big crisis and then you jump in and you fix it, everyone goes, brilliant, that was amazing. But I was really struck, actually. We were having there's a really interesting discussion going on our internal Engage community this week, which is like a kind of internal social network type of thing. And someone had put a quote from Desmond Tutu about how people were spending loads of time and effort rescuing people out of a river. People kept falling in the river and people had to keep pulling them out. And eventually he was saying, eventually it's time to go upstream and see what on earth is happening to cause all these people falling in the river.
Yeah.
And what that mindset is that we need to help people have. Again, it's back to being curious, isn't it? It's about to encouraging people to look at things and go, what is it that helps create a great environment? And that's one of the things I enjoy talking about most, is when I'm talking to teams about our annual engagement survey and they're thinking about what should we do. And everyone's immediate reaction is always to look at the red. If you've got a RAG dashboard, you go to the things that are all red, that are all bad, that are all broken, that need fixing. And I really try and encourage them to think, let's also look at the green things. Let's look at the things that you're doing well, because if you take your eye off of those, you're in real trouble. Those understanding why, back to that, why is that doing well? Protecting that, supporting that. There's a lot of scientific literature around that positive mindset and that idea of really working to your strengths and looking at that to really help lift performance. You do obviously, like I said, you need to look at when things do go wrong, but actually if things are continually going wrong, that is a huge drain on resources, energy, everything. You have no time left to do any of the investing in the right things to stop things happening. And nationally, it feels like there's a conversation like that probably going on a lot around public services and the NHS, and how do we invest in people's health and well-being so people don't get ill? It's like the hugest example of it out there at the moment, isn't it? And it's a massive knotty problem, but probably people don't usually get the luxury of time to look at those things, do they? They're dealing with day-to-day stuff coming in.
Yeah. No, I love that. So what you're saying is taking a step back, but also analyze what's working so you don't stop doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting what you said about the internal chat as well, because what you're doing at DEFRA, like the rivers and the soil and everything in the environment, is metaphorically and physically a culture, isn't it? Just like a workplace culture. And if you don't get those ingredients right, then whatever you're trying to produce isn't as effective or dies or whatever. And does that ever play through into how people have conversations? Because you're literally looking after the physical nature of the country, so that we get good outcomes. But that's obviously it's the closest analogy you can get to workplace culture.
Yes. And I think people do. I think they realize that been doing some work to try and identify our golden thread as an organization and what do we stand for, and what could all our people connect in with, and talking about us as an ecosystem, as a network, is really resonating with people because they understand that there are lots of multiple factors and layers in there that can all influence other bits that maybe aren't visible always to everyone. So they'll be doing their bit happily over here. Without knowing it, they're probably impacting, good or bad, on somebody in a completely different part of the organization, working on something completely different. But encouraging everyone to look at that through that lens of, in nature, it's just the same. If one thing shifts, other things will happen somewhere else in the system. And I think there's that, like you said, there's some really great stories, I hope, that we can have from that, about that understanding that there are lots of different things going on, but they all depend on each other. If one thing changes, it can change many other things.
Yeah. And I think that's, for me, that's one of the biggest summary points of how people used to try and view work as a factory and as robots. And I think that the subtlest shift that people can make is to think of it as part of nature and an ecosystem. And I'm pretty sure if you asked 99% of people, they would say that they've got more in common with nature than they do a robot. So I think that, again, it plays us to our strengths, doesn't it? Especially in a world of AI, where there are certain things that AI will be better at than human beings, but AI will never be better at connection, as an example. So it's about, I think that your question there of what we're good at is even more important as we move into this sort of AI dominated world.
Definitely. And it is, I think, again, probably in DEFRA, that using of technology to encourage people to think differently and to find patterns that they wouldn't have necessarily found themselves is a really interesting one, because it is, again, it depends so much on how these AI models have been developed, what data they're looking at, how that thing's been coded and everything. So I love the fact that at the moment government is really encouraging us to look into that and really think about how we can use it for good.
Yeah.
And not all be around getting rid of the bits of our work that we don't enjoy so much, but actually more, for me, it's more about the potential to really enhance work rather than a binary, it's technology or it's people. It's how can they sit alongside each other.
You only have to watch Terminator 2 to realize it doesn't have to end up badly.
Yeah.
We're going to pick up the pace now. So we've got 4 minutes and 2 questions. The big questions.
Big questions.
What is the role of leadership in creating a supportive work environment?
Oh, again, I spend a lot of time kind of talking about this question, and it's back to what I've been saying before. I think it is tough because when I talk to leaders, I have to say to them, the reality is engagement is going to be boring for you, because it is going to have to be you walking your talk every day. You're going to have to commit to some stuff and do it day in, day out, all the time, because the minute you stop, then the trust erodes and you have to start all over again to build that system. But I do think that is increasingly becoming, back to what you're saying about with AI and technology, what role a leader is going to play in shaping organizations is going to be even more critical, I think, because that is something that AI cannot do. It cannot be set a really inspiring vision for people, really galvanize people about something really critical and harness people's energy on that side. I think that's helping people make sense of the world. I've been working in change for quite a while, and people keep saying the world is really, it's changing at such a pace and things are really uncertain. I'm like, probably if you look back at most periods in history, that has also been true. It's how we think about the change that is what matters. It's how do we get ourselves in a positive mindset to see it as an opportunity. I think that's where I think leaders increasingly need to step in, is to think about those skills that some people may have them already, but maybe they're not very visible in organizations. How do we bring that out more?
And I think to connect your 2 points there, again, your strengths and prioritization as well, because even if you just think of a basic thing, like we don't go into the office at the happiness index that often, but we definitely do go in at least once a month. And I have to remind myself to clear my diary and not worry about emails, because and now I've got a load of stuff that's going in. And now I've probably got a load of emails and WhatsApps and LinkedIn messages and Slack, and everyone listening is the same scenario. But I have to remind myself, this might be the only time I spend that I see this person this month. So I just need to spend some time with them. That email can wait until tomorrow. But this is my only opportunity to connect. And I think, again, it's prioritizing that stuff, isn't it? Like, I know we like one-on-ones have every now and then you do have to reschedule and drop, but we've all got busy diaries. I only have 3 or 4 people that report into me directly. And sometimes I do have to shift their one-on-ones, but I do try and make it like the thing. And again, it's prioritization, isn't it? There's 1,000 things you could do with your time. How do you prioritize, going back to your point, how do you prioritize the stuff that's important and matters?
And it's very easy. And again, back to that balance, I've always liked the analogy of the urgent versus the important.
Yeah.
You tend to focus on the urgent stuff because that comes in right away. And when you're doing often the important stuff will just drop down your list a little bit.
Yeah.
And then you just have that little bit less space, or you have to cut a meeting short, or you go, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to talk to you next week or something. I always wonder how leaders, again, it's where they choose to put their energies, isn't it? And if they're often in that firefighting situation, they prioritize the urgent rather than the important. And I know it is a daily challenge for everyone because it feels like lots of fires are cropping up everywhere, all over the place for lots of people at the moment. We are in uncertain times, but actually it's that how can people choose where they put their energy? I think is where leaders can really set a good example. We watch and learn by observing what other people do, even if we won't say anything out loud. We'll notice, like you say, if someone says they're going to show up and then they don't, or they give us some signal to say, you're not as important as this other thing.
Yeah.
That will be buried in us and we will carry that with us in the future. It'll take 2 or 3 more extra coffees and donuts to get us back to zero again.
Yeah.
So it's that choosing what you invest in and realizing that short-term quick win versus the long-term boring slog. It's always attention.
Everyone's been in that position where they've been with someone. It doesn't even have to be work, where they're checking their phone, or they've got something that for whatever reason is more important than you right now. And this doesn't, no matter how no matter how confident you are in yourself and blah blah blah, it still hurts, doesn't it? It's still, you've met this person and they're on something else. Last question: how can we create an environment where employees feel empowered and free to be human? This links into the Happiness Index vision, which we say freedom to be human. But I'll ask it again just because I interrupted my own question, which is, how can we create an environment where employees feel empowered and free to be human?
Yeah. And again, this is a lovely question I love exploring with leaders because there's often a sense that you feel like you can make people be empowered. And like, you can't give people empowerment. They have to willingly want to step up and be ready for new challenges and try new things and talk openly about how they feel about work and share all of that. So actually, it goes back to that leadership thing for me. It's about how do leaders start small with some small conversations and listening and picking up those stories and playing those back into the organization vision and where that's going. I think definitely for me, that's where probably my intersection of comms and change and engagement with a bit of CI sprinkled in, it has been, for me, helped me see you need to bring all those things together. That's that ecosystem idea, that kind of nature one. There's no one magic answer to it, but it's looking at those underlying conditions that you need for things to thrive for me.
Yeah. And knowing what they are.
Yeah.
And you've been brilliant. I've got one extra bonus question that I'm just going to put in. If you went back exactly 20 years to that first day, what bit of advice would Anne now have for Anne 20 years ago?
I think it would be probably just enjoy the experience, enjoy the journey. Like, not knowing where you're going can actually be a superpower because it means that I've been curious and I've been open to things and not worrying about where I might end up and just take those opportunities when they come.
As someone who's worrying all the time, I'm taking that into my head and I'm taking that into the rest of the weekend. Thank you. You're amazing.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks, Anne.